My wife's secret affair unraveled our perfect life. Caught her with him. I turned the tables and walked away free before she could leave me. My name's Daniel, and I used to think I had it all figured out. For 10 years, I'd built a life with Sarah, my wife, my partner, the woman I'd met at a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon and knew I'd marry by the third date. We'd settled into a quiet suburb, a 2-story house with a garden I tended on weekends, a routine of shared dinners and lazy Sundays. I worked long hours at the accounting firm, crunching numbers until my eyes blurred, while she taught art at the local high school, her passion lighting up our home with sketches and color. We weren't perfect, money was tight, arguments flared, but I trusted her, loved her, believed in us. That belief held me together until the day it started to fray. It began a few months back, subtle shifts I couldn't pin down at first. Sarah's laughter grew thinner, her eyes drifting when we talked, her phone buzzing more than it used to. I'd catch her typing late at night, her screen angled away, a quick flicker of guilt crossing her face when I'd ask who it was. She'd brush it off. Students, colleagues, nothing to worry about. And I'd nod, swallowing the unease that crept into my chest. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband checking her every move. I told myself it was stress. Her school was cutting budgets, my overtime was wearing us thin, but the doubt lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. One evening, I came home early, the office quiet for once, and found the house empty. Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway, her usual after-school grading spot at the kitchen table untouched. I shrugged it off. She'd mentioned a staff meeting, maybe it ran late, and started dinner, chopping vegetables with a rhythm that steadied me. But as the clock ticked past 7, then 8, the unease grew. I texted her, my fingers hesitating over the keys, keeping it light. Where was she? Dinner was ready. No reply came, the silence stretching until headlights swept the driveway at 9. Her car pulling in like nothing was wrong. She stepped inside, her hair slightly mussed, her smile tight as she apologized. Grading had piled up, she'd lost track of time at school. I nodded, the food cold on the counter, and let it go, though her eyes wouldn't meet mine. The excuse made sense. Her workload had been brutal, but something felt off, a thread pulling loose in the fabric of our life. I pushed it down, blaming my tired mind. And we ate in a quiet that wasn't quite comfortable, her phone face down beside her plate, silent now, but heavy with presence. The next few weeks blurred into a pattern, late nights, vague answers, a distance I couldn't bridge. She'd linger in the bathroom after showers, her phone clutched tight, or slip out for errands that stretched too long. I'd lie awake, the bed cold beside me, her breathing soft but distant when she finally climbed in. My gut churned, whispering what my head refused to hear. She was hiding something, and it wasn't just work. I fought it, clinging to the life we'd built, but the cracks widened, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. One Saturday, she left early. Art supply run, she'd said, her voice breezy as she grabbed her keys. I watched her go, the car disappearing around the corner, and felt a pull I couldn't resist. I'd never been the type to snoop, but the doubt had grown teeth, gnawing at me until I moved. Her laptop sat on the desk in our spare room, a space she'd claimed for grading, its screen dark but unlocked. She'd forgotten to log out in her rush. My hands shook as I opened it, guilt warring with need, and clicked into her email. The inbox stared back, mundane at first, school updates, spam, a thread with her sister. But then I saw it, a name I didn't know, Mark, buried in a chain of messages she hadn't deleted. My heart thudded as I scrolled, the dates stretching back months, the words slicing through me like glass. Missed you last night, one read, sent after a late meeting she'd claimed. Can't wait for Tuesday, another said, paired with a date she'd been gone until 10. My breath caught as I read further. Intimate, casual, a thread of affection that wasn't mine. Photos followed, tucked in attachments. Her smiling beside a man I didn't recognize, his arm around her, their closeness a punch to my gut. I sat back, the room spinning, my hands cold against the desk. Mark, not a colleague, not a friend, a secret, a betrayal woven into the life I'd thought we shared. The timestamps matched her absences, her excuses aligning with lies I'd swallowed whole. I clicked deeper, finding a hotel receipt forwarded from his email. 2 nights, a weekend I'd spent alone while she'd visited her mom. The evidence piled up, undeniable, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. The man I'd been, trusting, steady, crumbling into someone raw and lost. I closed the laptop, my mind racing, anger and grief tangling in my chest. I wanted to storm out, to confront her the second she walked in, but I held back, the weight of it too much to process. I needed proof I could hold, something beyond a screen, so I grabbed my keys and drove, aimless at first, then toward the art store she'd claimed as her destination. The parking lot was quiet, her car nowhere in sight, and I sat there, the engine idling, knowing she wasn't coming. My phone stayed silent, no text to explain, and I drove home, the truth settling like lead in my bones. She returned that afternoon, her arms empty, no supplies, just a vague story about browsing too long. I nodded, my face a mask, the words I wanted to hurl locked behind my teeth. I watched her move through the house, cooking, humming, acting like nothing had changed, and felt the distance stretch into a chasm. That night, I lay beside her, her breathing even as she slept, and stared at the ceiling, the man I'd been slipping away. I'd loved her with everything, built a life on trust, and she'd torn it apart. But I wasn't ready to end it, not yet. I needed more, needed to see how deep the lie ran, and as the hours ticked by, I knew I'd find it, no matter what it cost me. Update 2. Sleep didn't come that night after I found Sarah's emails, the words from Mark searing into my mind like a brand. I lay beside her, the woman I'd loved for a decade, her breathing soft and steady while my world tilted off its axis. The photos, her smiling, his arm around her, played on a loop, each frame a knife twisting deeper. I'd built my life around us, 10 years of trust and sacrifice, and now it was unraveling, thread by thread, in the quiet of our bedroom. By morning, my eyes burned with exhaustion, but my resolve had hardened. I couldn't confront her yet, not with just a laptop screen. I needed more, something solid to hold up against her lies, and I'd find it, no matter how much it hurt. The next day unfolded like a charade. Sarah moved through the house with her usual rhythm, coffee brewing, toast browning, a kiss on my cheek as she left for school. I nodded through it, my face a mask, the warmth of her lips a hollow echo against the cold truth I carried. She grabbed her bag, her phone tucked inside, and drove off, leaving me alone with the silence and the plan forming in my head. I'd seen her excuses fall apart, the art store lie, the late nights, and I knew she wasn't just grading papers today. My gut told me she'd meet him, and I'd follow, a shadow trailing her secret. I waited until her car was out of sight, then grabbed my keys, my hands steady despite the tremor in my chest. The high school was a 15-minute drive, a brick building I'd visited for her art shows, but today it felt foreign, a stage for her deception. I parked across the street, far enough to blend in, and watched the lot fill with teachers and students. Her car sat near the entrance, a blue sedan I'd helped her pick out, and I settled in, the engine off, my eyes locked on it. Hours ticked by, lunch passed, the afternoon dragged, and I wondered if I'd misjudged, if she'd stay put. But then, just past 3, she emerged, her bag slung over her shoulder, her pace quick as she climbed into her car. She didn't head home. I followed at a distance, my truck blending into traffic, my heart pounding as she turned away from our suburb, weaving through streets I rarely traveled. The city sprawled ahead, and she pulled into a cafe parking lot, a small place with big windows, one we'd never been to together. I parked a block away, my breath shallow, and watched her step out, her hair catching the light as she scanned the lot. A man approached, tall, dark-haired, familiar from those photos, and my stomach lurched. "Mark." She smiled, a real smile I hadn't seen in months, and they hugged, his hand lingering on her back as they went inside. I sat there, the world narrowing to that window, their shapes blurred through the glass. They sat close, her laughter cutting through the distance, his hand brushing hers across the table. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, anger and grief tangling into a knot I couldn't unravel. This wasn't a meeting, a fling. It was intimacy, a connection she'd built while I faded into the background of her life. I wanted to storm in, to shatter their moment, but I held back, my need for proof outweighing my rage. I snapped photos with my phone, grainy, shaky shots of them together, each click a brick in the wall I'd build against her. They stayed an hour, the sun dipping low as they left, his arm around her waist, her head tilting toward him. She drove off alone, and I followed again, my mind racing as she took a route I didn't expect. Not home, but a motel on the edge of town, a squat building with flickering neon. She parked, waited, and Mark's car rolled in minutes later, his stride confident as he met her at a room door. They disappeared inside, the door clicking shut, and I sat frozen, the reality crashing over me. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a life she'd carved out, a betrayal that ran deeper than I'd feared. I drove home, the photos burning in my pocket, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. She returned later, her story ready, faculty drinks, catching up with staff, and I nodded, my silence a shield as she moved through the kitchen, oblivious to the storm inside me. I watched her, the woman I'd loved, and saw a stranger, her ease a lie, her touch a ghost of what it used to be. That night, I slept on the couch, the bed too close to her deception, and planned my next move. The photos were proof, but I needed more, her words, her admission, to face what came next. Days blurred into a tense routine. She left for work. I tailed her when I could, the cafe and motel becoming her haunts. Mark was there, always, their closeness a wound I couldn't stop picking at. I dug deeper, checking her laptop when she showered, finding more emails, plans, affection, a history stretching back a year. My anger grew, but so did a cold clarity. I wasn't just a victim. I was a man waking up. I started documenting it all, photos, dates, receipts I found in her purse, building a case not for her, but for me, to reclaim what she'd taken. One evening, she slipped up. She left her phone on the counter, unlocked, a rare lapse as she stepped outside to water the garden. I grabbed it, my pulse racing, and opened her messages. Mark's name glowed at the top, a thread of text from that day. Meet me at 7, usual spot, can't wait to see you. My hands shook as I scrolled, finding older ones. Love how you make me feel. He doesn't suspect a thing. That last one hit hardest. She'd mocked me, my trusted joke to them. I snapped a photo of the screen, my proof complete, and set the phone back, my resolve stealing into something unbreakable. She came inside, her hands damp, her smile casual, and I felt the shift. I wasn't playing her game anymore. I'd seen her with him, read her words, held the evidence of her double life. The life we'd built was a lie, and I wouldn't live it another day. As she cooked dinner, humming like nothing was wrong, I sat silently, the photos and texts a weight in my pocket, my mind racing toward the end. I wouldn't confront her yet, not until I was ready, not until I'd taken back what was mine. She'd broken us, but I'd break free, and when I did, she'd see the man she'd underestimated. Update 3. The days after I saw those texts on Sarah's phone stretched into a tightrope walk, every moment a balance between rage and restraint. I'd held her secret in my hands, photos of her with Mark, emails spilling their intimacy, messages laughing at my blindness, and it changed me. The man who'd trusted her, who'd built a decade of quiet love, was gone, replaced by someone sharper, colder, waiting for the right moment to strike. She moved through our house like nothing had shifted, her routines a mask I saw through now. Coffee poured, dinners cooked, her touch a hollow echo of what it once meant. I played along, my silence a weapon, my eyes tracking her every move as I planned my escape. I couldn't confront her yet, not with just evidence, not without securing my own ground. The life we'd built was tangled. Our house, our accounts, 10 years of shared threads I needed to untie before I cut her loose. I started small, late at night when she slept, her breathing even beside me as I slipped to the spare room. Her laptop glowed in the dark, still unlocked from her carelessness, and I dug deeper. Bank statements, joint savings, a mortgage in both our names. My accounting skills kicked in, numbers a lifeline as I traced our finances, finding cracks she'd widened. Withdrawals I hadn't noticed, hundreds here, 1,000 there, lined up with her errands, money siphoned to fuel her other life. The realization hit hard. She hadn't just betrayed me with Mark. She'd used our money, my work, to fund it. I felt the burn of it, my hands clenching as I copied the records, each click a step toward freedom. I opened a new account the next day, rerouting my paycheck in secret, a shield against her reach. The house was trickier, half hers, half mine, I called a lawyer friend, Tom, from a burner phone I'd bought, keeping it off her radar. He listened as I laid it out. Her affair, the evidence, my need to protect what was mine, and promised to draft papers, quiet and fast, to start the unraveling. Work became my refuge, the firm's hum a distraction from the storm at home. I stayed late, crunching numbers I didn't need, letting Sarah think overtime was the culprit while I built my case. She didn't question it. Her own absences gave her no room to push, and I used the time to watch her patterns. She'd slip out after school, her car a beacon I followed when I could, the cafe and motel her stages of deceit. Mark was there, always, his presence a wound I'd learned to study, not just feel. I snapped more photos, his car, their hands brushing, her smile, and added them to the file growing on my laptop, a story of betrayal I'd tell when the time was right. One afternoon, I trailed her again, my truck a shadow as she drove to the motel, Mark's car already waiting. I parked across the street, my camera steady, but something shifted. She lingered outside, her phone pressed to her ear, her posture tense. Mark stepped out, his face tight, and they stood close, their movements sharp, agitated. I zoomed in, catching the strain, her hands waving, his head shaking, and felt a flicker of something new. Trouble in their paradise, maybe, a crack I hadn't expected. They parted fast, her car peeling out, and I followed, my mind racing as she headed home, her speed reckless for once. She beat me there, her car in the driveway, the house lights on when I pulled in. I stepped inside, my mask intact, and found her in the kitchen, her hands busy with dishes, her face flushed. She offered a quick excuse, parent-teacher night, stressful day, and I nodded, my silence a test she didn't notice failing. But her phone buzzed on the counter, Mark's name flashing before she snatched it, her fingers quick to mute it. I saw the panic in her eyes, fleeting but real, and knew something had shifted. Her secret was fraying, and I'd use it. That night, I waited until she showered, her routine a clock I'd mastered, and checked her phone again, unlocked, another slip. The texts with Mark were fresh, urgent. He'd pushed for more, a weekend away, and she'd resisted, citing me, the life she still played at. His frustration bled through, a demand she'd dodged, and I felt the twist. He wanted her to leave me, to make it real, and she hadn't. Not yet. I snapped the screen, my proof piling higher, and set it back, my plan sharpening. She was faltering, caught between her worlds, and I'd push her to the edge. The next morning, I acted, called in sick, a rare break she didn't question, and watched her leave, her car disappearing toward school. I drove to Tom's office, the burner phone my lifeline, and sat across from him as he spread the divorce papers on his desk. He'd moved fast, assets split, the house to be sold, my evidence enough to protect me in court. I signed, my hand steady, the ink a line drawn through 10 years. Tom promised to file discreetly, giving me time to move, and I left with copies, my future await in my hands. Back home, I packed, clothes, files, the essentials, into a bag I stashed in the truck, my exit rehearsed. I didn't take much, the house was hers to lose now, but I grabbed my laptop, the photos, the proof that would free me. Sarah returned that evening, her face drawn, her story thin, another late meeting, and I watched her, my calm a blade she didn't see. She cooked, her hands unsteady, and I ate in silence, the air thick with what I knew and she didn't. Her phone stayed close, her glances nervous, and I felt the shift. She sensed something, but not enough. That night, I lay awake, the couch my refuge again, the papers hidden in my truck a promise of release. She slept upstairs, oblivious, but I knew the end was close. Tom would file soon, and I'd be gone before she could spin more lies. But as dawn broke, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, simple and sharp. She's planning to leave you. Tonight. My heart stopped, the words a jolt I hadn't expected. Mark? Maybe, or someone watching their game. I couldn't tell, but it changed everything. She was moving, faster than I'd thought, and I'd have to move faster. Update 4. The text, she's planning to leave you. Tonight, hit me like a shockwave as dawn crept through the blinds, the couch creaking beneath me. I'd spent the night restless, my divorce papers stashed in the truck, my plan to slip away locked in place. But this changed the tempo. Sarah was moving, her affair with Mark pushing her to a breaking point I'd only half seen coming. My hands tightened around the phone, The unknown number a mystery. Mark, a friend, a stranger, but it didn't matter. It was a warning, a chance to act before she did, and I wouldn't waste it. 10 years of trust had crumbled, but I'd built something stronger in its ruins. Control over my own ending. Morning broke, and I moved fast, my mask of calm perfected as Sarah stirred upstairs. She came down, her hair tousled, her eyes shadowed, pouring coffee with hands that trembled slightly. A sign she was unraveling, her double life fraying at the edges. I watched her, my silence a wall, as she grabbed her bag and left for school, her routine a lie I no longer believed. The moment her car vanished, I sprang into action, grabbed my bag, the laptop, the burner phone, and loaded the truck. Tom had filed the papers yesterday. He'd confirmed late last night, and the clock was ticking. She'd be served soon, but I'd be gone first, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. I drove to a storage unit I'd rented days ago, a small space on the edge of town, and stashed my things, clothes, files, the evidence of her betrayal boxed tight. The house was hers to lose now. The sale Tom had arranged a clean break I'd walk away from with my share. I kept moving, called the firm from the burner, resigned with a vague excuse, my voice steady as I cut that tie too. My savings were safe, rerouted to the new account, and I felt the weight lift, piece by piece, the life I'd clung to slipping off like a worn coat. By noon, I was ready, truck packed, a motel room booked an hour away, a fresh start within reach. But I couldn't leave without one last look. I drove back, parking a street over, and watched our house, quiet, unassuming, a shell of what it had been. Sarah's car wasn't there, school still in session, but I knew she'd be home soon, her plan to leave me brewing. I didn't wait long. Headlights swept the driveway as dusk fell, her sedan rolling in, and I tensed, my hands gripping the wheel. She stepped out, her bag heavy, her pace quick, but then another car pulled up. Mark's, unmistakable from my photos, his frame climbing out with a duffel of his own. My pulse spiked as they met on the porch, their movements rushed, urgent. She unlocked the door, and he followed, their bags a signal. This was it, her exit, the moment she'd chosen him over me. I felt the sting, sharp and brief, but it faded fast, replaced by a cold clarity. She thought she'd outrun me, slip away with him, but I'd beaten her to it. I started the truck, ready to go, but then a third car rolled up, a plain sedan, a man in a suit stepping out, papers in hand. The process server, right on time, Tom's promise delivered. I watched as he knocked, the door opening, Sarah's face freezing as he handed her the divorce summons, Mark hovering behind her, confusion twisting his features. I didn't stay for the fallout, her shock, his questions, the unraveling of their plan. I pulled away, the house shrinking in the rear view, a chapter closing with every mile. The text had been right. She'd meant to leave tonight, but I'd left first, my freedom won before she could claim hers. I drove to the motel, the night settling around me, and checked in, the room sparse but mine. I sat on the bed, the burner phone silent, and let it sink in. 10 years gone, a love betrayed, but a life reclaimed. The anger lingered, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by relief, a quiet strength I hadn't known I had. Days turned to weeks, the divorce grinding through its paces. Tom called. Sarah had fought at first, her lawyer scrambling, but the evidence was ironclad. Photos, texts, financial records proving her affair and her theft. She settled fast, the house sold, my half wired to my account. Her silence a concession she couldn't undo. Mark faded too, rumors through mutual friends hinting he'd pushed her to leave, only to back off when the papers hit, his commitment thinner than she'd hoped. I didn't care. Their mess was theirs, and I was done carrying it. I moved, an apartment an hour away, small but new. A blank slate I filled with my own choices. Work came next, a freelance gig crunching numbers from home, steady in mind. The past lingered, photos of us I burned, her sketches I boxed away, but it didn't own me. One night, my phone buzzed, a text from an old friend, Greg, who'd heard through the grapevine. He'd seen Sarah at the cafe, alone, her face drawn, and I felt a flicker, not pity, but distance. She'd chosen her path, and I'd chosen mine. Months later, I stood on my balcony, the city lights sprawling below, and breathed easier than I had in years. The betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't buried me. I dug out, piece by piece, and found something better. I wasn't the man who'd trusted blindly anymore. I was the one who'd seen the truth, fought for himself, and walked away stronger. Sarah had taken my love, my trust, but she couldn't take my future. That was mine, built from the ashes of her lies. And as the wind brushed my face, I knew I'd made it. Not whole, but free.